Okay, so my name's Hollie Lubbock. I'm a UX and visual designer. I work for the Bureau for Visual Affairs in London, which isn't actually a government department, although it sounds like one. It's a small design agency. There's about 9 of us, and it's been set up for about the last 12 years. We mainly work with cultural institutions, so museums and galleries, and it's mainly on visual design and UX. So today I'm going to be talking to you about how design can help communicate data, who in the cultural sector is using open data, and then a few case studies, so some work that I've actually done, so I'll probably know that stuff a lot better. There's a lot of links in the talk, but I'm going to post it online later, so don't worry about scribbling them down. On reflection, I probably shouldn't have put so many links in, but you know, it goes like that sometimes. So basically, why I think design is awesome when it comes to data. So there's a lot of information available to us every day. Obviously, we all carry smartphones. Some of you have got wristbands which track your activity. So we're actually gathering a lot of information together. But actually, without the data skills to interpret it, it's fairly meaningless to most people. So by taking data and actually formatting it, so diagrams, maps, graphs, or an interface, it gives people a way to actually understand that data. This is an example of flight paths. So visualizations like this are being used at the moment when we're talking about the spread of disease. So for example, Ebola. So you can see how, because the world's so interconnected, we can't actually limit things like that very easily. So some of these visualizations are used for that. This is another visualization that's about interconnected chapters in the Bible. But I think that basically data skills are going to become more important because more and more people are using data. We're getting a lot more of it in our lives. And if you don't have the skills to interpret it or you don't have someone to help you interpret that data, it's going to be pretty meaningless. And then, so this is a visualization that basically places us within a time period. So time's something that's relatively abstract and it's quite difficult to actually think through. So I think this is quite a nice, it's a very quick example of how you can actually use data and format it to make it much more easy for people to understand. Having said that, although I think design is great, it's not a superhero or a silver bullet. It can only work with what we've got. So if we don't have very good data in the first place, or if we don't have an idea how to use that data, design can't solve that problem for us. We need to have some method to do that first. So obviously, you can tell that I really like information graphics and graphs. But can infographics actually change people's lives? Are they really that important? So this is an example of a diagram that did actually change public policy in the UK. So it's a very famous infographic. It's one of the first that was made, and it was by Florence Nightingale. So during the Crimean War, she was a nurse in hospitals, so was actually seeing how the care of patients was being affected when they came back from the front. So she used this graph to actually show that a lot of the soldiers were dying in the hospitals, possibly from preventable infections versus actually dying on the front from fatal wounds. So by using diagrams like this, she actually changed some public policy and got much more hygiene instated in hospitals. This is the Underground, which is obviously very close to my heart living in London. Pre-1933, it was visualized like this. So it was based on geographical location of the tube stops. So although this is actually true to life, it wasn't very easy for people to use, so we actually moved on there. So this is the tube map in the earliest form that it was from 1933, and it's actually still in this form. So it becomes much more of a diagram, and it actually looks more like a circuit diagram. There are very strict rules as to how you can place stations, so all of the alignments and where you can actually place them are defined. It means that everything has enough space to breathe and you can actually read this information and get use cases out of it. I think this is quite interesting because when you move to London the first time, you are very, very reliant on the tube system. You don't know any different. You're not going to walk around because on this map, it looks really far, and actually it's not. It's only about a 5-minute walk between some of these stations. So although this visualization is really good for people finding their way around the network, in real life it's actually skewed our view of the way that London's laid out. This is a project that was done in the last year or so. It's part of the Open Data Institute's Data as Culture program. It's called Invisible Airs, and it's by a company called Yoha. So they actually used Bristol Council's data, and they produced small machines and pieces of artwork from that data. So this is one about funding in libraries. So every time funding in libraries is cut, the knife actually stabs the book. So it's trying to like do a really nice visualization of actually there is this data available, but for the general public or for people to engage with, is it that useful if it's not interpreted in a way that's, I mean, this is obviously, I find this quite fun and amusing, but you know, that's just me. And then this one is about council expenditure. So it's actually a bicycle seat that's on a pneumatic pump. So the more money the council spends, the higher the seat lifts you up in the air. So it's all dependent on exactly the data that's coming through. So Bristol City have done a great job. They've actually released 51 data sets. They're on the gov.uk site. So I think a few talks earlier have mentioned the gov.uk site. They're mainly in CSV and XML format. But as I was saying, that data, unless it's presented to the public and interpreted in some format, it's not actually that useful. So even if it's something like this, which is an art project, and it's not directly, the point of this is more that things need to be done with this data versus that these artworks have a meaning in themselves. They're actually about, let's show people we've got it and let's express it to them. So what should we be trying to achieve with design? So for me, it's clear, simple presentations. Allow the users to make up their own minds. So rather than present data to them in a format where there's no interpretation from them needed, we should be giving it to people and allowing them to have some sort of input to it. And we should also be trying to inspire users to create something with the data themselves. So actually saying it's here and it's readily available and we can give you tools to actually use it for yourselves. So I've spoken at a mile a minute, so I'm going to try and slow down for you guys. Sorry about that. OK, so the cultural sector. This is a sector that I work with a lot. By this, I mean museums and galleries in particular. So in the UK, they hold a lot of collections for the public, and they're actually funded by public money. So they obviously have physical spaces. The physical spaces are nowhere near big enough to actually hold the amount of collections that they have. So they have these fantastic stores full of amazing artifacts and records that no one ever gets access to, or very few people do have access to it. So I think in part because of that, and they're very aware that they can't showcase everything, they've been a big adopter of open data and semantic web technologies to actually try and get over the fact that physical spaces can only showcase so much information. So who's doing what? The Victoria and Albert Museum have released a collections data API. So there's a collection of 1 million objects and over 500,000 images. The V&A is in South Kensington in London. It's one of the world's leading museums of art and design. So they showcase everything from paintings to actual physical product design. So it's one of the only spaces where you can see that kind of work. And they've released all of their collections data for people to be able to use. So their actual mission is to promote the practice of design and increase knowledge and understanding and enjoyment of the designed world. So that was a big, long mission statement that they have. Okay, the British Museum have also released their collections data. The British Museum was the first national public museum in the world, so this is where museums start off. So obviously in the history of museums, they start with collectors who are wealthy individuals having lots of things, bringing them together, and then actually having, wanting the public to be able to have access to it and opening it up for them. So the British Museum's got 2 million records available, and that represents over 3.5 million objects. So there's a hell of a lot of data on that one. Europeana, which is a much more cross-European initiative. So I don't know how many of you have used Europeana or know about Europeana already, but it actually brings in the data from a lot of museums together and puts those into one place that you can query. Then there's the Tate Modern Museum. So that's a modern art gallery in London. They've got an amazing collection. They do showcase a lot of it, but unfortunately, as with all the other museums, they can't showcase everything. They actually own 70,000 artworks, and the details for these are available on GitHub. So those are just a few of the resources that are available. This website actually has a pretty comprehensive list of data sets that are available across the UK and across the world. So there's a lot of museums all across Europe and all across America doing this. So how have these been presented to the public? So they drive the data searches on their own sites. they're trying to move towards 5-star open data. So a lot of collections records are in very old style databases. They're not actually data-wise that clean. And so they're moving towards trying to actually clean up that data and make it much more accessible for people. And because obviously the institutions have been fairly siloed until now, they're trying to come together and come up with common vocabularies to describe the data that they actually hold. So they're using things like schema.org to add value to their data. So this is an example of something that was actually built with one of the APIs. So this is from the Walters Art Museum. They had a hackathon, and they asked people to come up with projects. So this one is called ArtMe. So it basically, you tweet, it's a Twitter bot, you tweet at it just a word, so it could be tree, cat, whatever you want, and they'll actually query the collections database and return you an image which they then annotate with the dopamine from collections records. So these are some other ones that were produced. So I think this is quite an interesting project because it's done over a weekend. It's actually showing that you can produce quite a lot of value from these data sets very quickly. And it's also extending the collection out onto social media. So although it was done within the context of a museum, it's using memes and other social media to actually bring users in who maybe wouldn't be so concerned with a museum collection. And it's trying to make that much more public. So I think in that way it's really good. Also, museums tend to kind of transmit information, and there's less of a conversation between users and museums, or up until now there has been. Obviously, you visit a museum, you view their collections, you're not, or most people wouldn't have access to the curators or actually to discuss what they're seeing with someone who's knowledgeable. But actually, by using social media and actually getting out there, they can turn it into a conversation rather than a one-way traffic piece, which I think is really important. Okay. That was a blank slide to remind me to pause and maybe actually drink something. So this is a project called Open Context. This is showcasing records from archaeological digs. So this is on the homepage of their site. Each of these circles actually represents how many records are from each geographical location. So the size and the colour is showing you what's there. You can actually investigate this map, and if you click on one of the sort of bubbles, you can see how many items relate to that bubble and where that excavation project took place. So from here, you can go into a normal style search interface, which actually lists all of the records that are available. They've also done an alternative view of that data set. So this is a timeline of the same data. So they've got these amazing search records, which, unless you're an academic or knowing exactly what you're looking for, can appear quite dry, but actually presenting it in geographical or timeline format makes it a little bit more accessible and a bit more open to people browsing. Rather than having to know exactly what you want to get out of these searches, you can start to browse it and actually enjoy this, these rich data sets that are out there. So I mentioned that the Tate has an API earlier. This is something that was produced with that API. So again, I find it really interesting because it's about browsing. So you have themes or actual subjects of artwork depicted in a network-style diagram. And when you select one, it gathers like the next level down to it. So you can navigate this way. So again, it's more of a browsing experience. And once you get down to a record that's low enough, you actually pull back a search return. So this is... Oh. No, okay, the video won't play. It was just me browsing it. It wasn't exactly the best video, but I just thought, you know, put it in. This, again, is using the Tate's collection. So this is just looking at one aspect of artwork, so how big it is, so how wide it is by how tall it is. And the things that... this is a visualization by Jim Davenport, sorry, I should begin with that. So from this, he deduced that on the whole, people prefer artworks in a 4:3 format. And from, again, this is an assumption, but perhaps you can read this into it, that maybe stock canvases are that size. So maybe this is something that's been brought about by actually what's available to people versus actually, do they definitely want to always make artwork in this format? That there are more tall pieces than wide pieces, and the golden ratio is still pretty important in artwork. So although this map, this graph isn't the most visual of representations, he then took this and wanted to produce more of an artwork style piece from this data set. So he produced this. So he's actually making each of the artwork records into a wireframe and then overlaying them onto each other. So it becomes more of a piece of a modern art piece. So I think it's really nice that there was this data and analysis done, and then it was taken on a stage further to actually reference the type of data that it had used. This one is by Tim Hodson. It's called Who Wrote to Whom, which is quite difficult to say. It uses the National Archives data set to visualize correspondence. It's from the data sets from the 12th to 16th century, and it gives details of writers, recipients, and actually the subject of that data. So, let's see if I can make this one play. So again, it's much more of a browsing type experience because these records are obviously, there's thousands of them in there, but by actually doing things like this, you can make it so that people can get a small level of access and encourage actually a much deeper engagement with it from that point on. So, what's next? So common thesauri and vocabulary are being developed across the museum sector. They're developing APIs. There are hack days happening at quite a lot of museums or art galleries. And this is something that one of the guys from the Open Data Institute put out there, that maybe as our museums and cultural sectors and even the government is actually publicly funded, perhaps we can look to a future where having open data is actually a requirement for that funding. And if you want to get it, then you need to actually be open with your data. I just think it's a really important point to actually think about, that in the future, people are looking to be more open, and they're putting the building blocks in place now, probably because they're also thinking along those same lines. This is something which I find quite exciting. This is a project that's at the Barbican. They're creating an ontology for events and performances rather than just collections data. So although some of the schema.org and c.crm, if I can get that right, systems actually are very good at describing artifacts and some types of events, they're not very good at describing performance-related artworks. So pieces that are to do with films or for performance art particularly, it's not actually very good at describing that kind of entity relationships. So they're working very hard on this at the moment, and hopefully it will be put back into the community, but we'll have to wait and see. So let me just grab some water. So why do museums do this? Why are they quite keen adopters of this technology? So this is an image of the Cabinet of Curiosities, or a Cabinet of Curiosities. As I was saying, this is where museums began. It's people collecting things and putting them all together in a room and allowing people access and saying, I've got this great stuff, come and see it. And unlike museums today, which are heavily curated and very narrative journeys, so you get into a museum and a curator's laid it out for you, and generally, unless you kind of walk against the flow that's been set up for you, you're going to get a quite mediated experience where they've actually set which way you'll walk through an exhibition or which way you might enter through a gallery space. So in the beginning, it was much more that you were making your own connections, and you could put and again, it's much more to do with browsing. It's actually saying that, oh, I can see a connection between these two things, although they're not definitely related by one subject, they are related by a slightly different subject. So I think that's why they're so keen on doing this, and getting back to that idea that things can be related across disciplines and across museums, and that actually the collections that they hold belong to the public as a whole, and it's not just that they belong to the British Museum or they belong to the V&A, they actually belong to the general public. So this is some stuff that I've actually worked on. Hooray! So basically, I'm going to take you through some old work, some new work, and for once, I can actually show you some work in progress, which is really unusual for me. As a user experience designer, we normally work with commercial clients, and there's a lot of sensitivity to actually showing people work in progress, sketches, things that aren't actually published already. So I think it's really interesting that I've been able to show you some stuff. So it's really draft, so just bear with it. So I've obviously showed you a lot of graphing, and you can probably tell that I enjoy graphs and maps of data. So this is a project that I've actually worked on that does that. So the Royal Shakespeare Company came to us, and it was an anniversary of Shakespeare, I think, last year. I'm going to say it was 500, but it might have been less. But they actually wanted to show how Shakespeare was still relevant in everyone's lives today. So we were talking about different ideas, and there were ideas about mapping and saying that Shakespeare and Shakespeare's plays actually influence a lot of place names in the UK. So you get quite a lot of roads that will be like Romeo and Juliet Close, for example, and maybe different areas that are named after things to do with Shakespeare. But when we were going through it and actually thinking that through, we were coming up with interfaces where you could like highlight these yourself and actually say, well, this area, I think this is to do with Shakespeare because of this thing. But actually, that's a lot based on historical record and to do with naming of roads or places. And it's not really a relevance of now, it's a relevance of everything up until now versus actually what's going on currently. So then we look to actually social media and looking at what search terms and what tweets and different things were actually related to Shakespeare that were happening currently. So we ran this project over the anniversary. There was a lot of work that was going on at the same time. So we took tweets and Flickr and eBay. Unfortunately, when I did this screenshot, Twitter API had stopped working, so that's not being pulled in. But you can actually search back through the last month, and using the stream graph, you can see which areas the information is coming from and how much the relevance, like how many tweets or how many items on eBay are being sold with that. So we've got a stream graph going along the top, and then down the bottom, we've actually got the actual pieces of data that it's coming from. So these are those there. So you can see they all mix in together and they kind of cascade down. So they're doing a waterfall while the stream graph's doing a stream. So it's kind of like, you know, two water metaphors going together. You've also got filtering by different categories. So you can filter by the types of plays. So comedies, histories, and tragedies. As I said, you can go back through time by day. And this is me using it, just so you can see. And when I actually did, last time I screenshot it was about 3 months ago, and this time, Flickr wasn't working either, so that was great. This project only ran for about a month, so the fact that it's still online, obviously some of the pieces that were built are no longer working, unfortunately. So when you find a piece of data that you're interested in, you can actually go and look at that from the original source. So it was just a very quick way of helping them actually see how much data is being produced that's relevant to Shakespeare today, and that it is still quite a major part of our lives. So that was that one. Another project that I've worked on looked at using open data as an enhancement to the collections that they already had. So it was for the V&A Museum. As I was saying, they're the world's largest museum of decorative arts and design, and they've been around since 1850s. But they basically were very engaged with user contributions and actually the wider web, and they weren't so fixated. They were very open to being inclusive to data from elsewhere being pulled into their site, and actually being part of a wider conversation, not just saying we're the V&A, we're the authority on this, but saying we have this viewpoint, but there are these other viewpoints out there and they're just as relevant, and we actually want to be part of that conversation rather than just say, you know, we're the museum, we have this set view. So with this in mind, we quite drastically changed the navigation system, and there's a much more subject-based navigation that you can actually use, which is pulling together pieces of information from across the site. So it goes by subjects, so architecture, ceramics, glass, for example, periods and styles, and then there are different sorts of activities that they hold. So it's, you know, a standard mega menu piece. But then one of the pieces that we did from that was actually saying, okay, if we're saying that it's all based around themes, then we can actually use that as the taxonomy for our site. And if we've used that as the taxonomy for our site, we can build search returns from it. And those search returns don't have to look like a boring list. That search return can actually look like a proper landing page. And then depending on how much data you've got, we can say, okay, you get this amazing landing page. If you've got slightly less data, you actually get a slightly less good template, for example. So the first level would be, if you've got a lot of video content, we can produce a very, very rich template for you. If you've got a lot of images, we can do a level down and so forth. So it's actually using search to drive a lot of the site, which obviously when it came to build, which I'm sure you guys would be much more comfortable with than me, it was obviously quite a big problem. So this is, I'm going to call it a decision tree. I'm not sure that's exactly the right name for it. But to help do exactly what I've described. So we broke it up into modules, and we were saying, if my search includes this module, then I get this template. If my search includes that one, but not this one, then I have this, and so forth. So this is what that actually looks like. So this is an example of the top level template. So we get an introduction, possibly by the curator, maybe a walk around the gallery. We then have top articles that are related to that topic or theme. And then we have areas of interest within that theme, which are basically sub-themes. But from there, we've obviously got the collections as well. So initially, we were discussing that actually the open data and information from around the web would be mixed in with this content. But as that's very difficult to get through politically in some places. So rather than it having to be mixed together, we actually pulled it all together, and so we have the V&A's view, and then we have around the web view. So this is what that would be. So it's pulling in stuff from Wikipedia for the definition of what that topic is going out to news websites and pulling back any relevant news. Again, with Twitter, we've got Flickr on there as well. So it's trying to actually involve them in the wider conversation. So I think it was really interesting that they were willing to be part of the wider conversation and not just say, we are the authority on something. So this project is called Research Space. I actually worked on it with a company here in Sofia. So they're called Onto Text. I think they do a lot of semantic web projects. It was a project about a collection of collections. So it was a prototype, and it was I think this is the third round, and then it will go into actually production for application. It's a tool for academics to collaborate on. So it involves a very complex semantic search engine. It's got a data annotation tool and an image annotation tool. So everything that researchers are doing, they're actually marking it up, and then it's all, there's an RDF store and CDOC-CRM vocabulary actually taking their annotations and their work and putting it back in so that the wider community has access to that again. So this is a search term where you can see multiple collections coming together. So there's the Royks Bureau from Holland, the Yale Centre for British Art, and the bottom one is the British Museum. So they all had their data. Rather than going by the, if I can speak, the lowest common denominator and having to mark their data up exactly the same, by using C.CRM, they actually kept the detail in their own systems so that it doesn't become just something that's by the lowest factor. You can actually have things that are much more relevant to an art museum in those fields kept with things that are much more relevant to somewhere which is used to dealing with artifacts. So it's a mix of pieces of information together. So as I was saying, there's a common thesauri or taxonomy. And this was quite difficult to visualize. Obviously, it results in a search return and application design, but actually, the type of searches you were able to perform were incredibly complex. So someone who can write a Sparkle query, which isn't me, could actually cool. Right, I've actually talked for longer than I thought I would. Let's move on. Right, so how would you like to search? So ideally, I think search would be really good. If you're talking to a librarian or archivist, they know their collections the best. You can formulate things in a way to them that generally for a search system you can't. So we will skip through these drawings. But basically, we ended up with something like this. This is the first example of a visualization. So we're actually saying that if the best way to search is talking to someone, then as much as possible, can we simulate a sentence or some sort of discussion with that search engine? So we're using words like find and then the search term, and then we're saying or and narrow and expand. So we've got obviously an autocomplete search with the British Museum's thesauri on it. Then you can add or subtract another search term to it. And then this is, oh, good, it's working. So here we start searching for paint, which obviously could be painted, which is a technique, versus painting, which is a type of object. So you can actually clarify to begin with exactly what you're searching for. There you've seen that you can flick between and or searches. So again, you can define what you're looking for. And the last one, let me skip to it. So when you start to put in that the next term is India, it knows what the most common relationship between a painting, a type of object, and India is likely to be. So it suggests that for you. So it's likely to be from India versus about India or currently in India. So you can actually build up incredibly complex search returns from this interface. But yeah, it is just trying to visualize that. So open as a core value. This is the work in progress. So it's for the Southbank Centre. We're currently working with them, but as part of their digital strategy, they've come up with this as a manifesto, that they want an open platform, an open community, open content, open vocabulary, open data, and open process. So what this means in practicalities is they're using open source. They have community guidelines and welcome actually involvement from the community. They're using schema.org for a common vocabulary. And they're going to be releasing a linked data API. So this is the project team. As part of one of the festivals at the Southbank Centre, it was called the Web We Want. So they actually were getting the public in and members of the web community to say, what is the web we actually want? So as part of that, we got amazing access to a load of users, which normally it would be incredibly expensive and difficult to do. So we could actually say to them, what do you want out of the Southbank Centre's website? What are we not doing for you that you would like? And they put on a lot of events. So mainly it came down to finding events faster, what's happening right now. And as part of the festival, they made everyone work in a glass box. So the general public can wander in, ask you any questions that they like, and actually see what people are working on. So they really are trying to actually get to the point where people are involved in this project from the beginning. It's always being blogged about, all the work in progress. And let me just skip past that. So we have this pinned up on the glass box on the outside, so anyone who wants to can come and look at the designs and comment on them. And then this is one of the mock-ups for it. So this is the idea that if we know you've searched for Colin Curry or you're interested in Colin Curry, who's a percussionist, we can actually tell you how many events and talks are coming up to do with him. So you're interested in a person, but we put on events, so we will tell you about the events and talks that we have that are available to you for him. So you can follow the progress here. They blog about it most weeks, and it's, I think it's really interesting that as a project they've been willing to be open and actually involve people in their process. So this is the conclusion of my talk. I think we should be helping people engage with open data and data in general as much as possible. Just having it there or putting it out into the wide world isn't enough. If you don't help people interpret it and you don't give them the skills that they need to actually use it, it's just not really very good, I don't think anyway. So I think we can use design to help people do this. So thanks for listening. It was probably got really fast at the end. Cool, so yeah.
Hey, great talk.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, how do you visualize the future of open data? Because we're gathering more and more data, and we have like billions of years of human people processing those data sets, and we have no good idea how to visualize them. How do you see the future of visualizing that data to people and how they can use it in their everyday lives?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Obviously, there are a lot of open source systems out there. I think one of the visualizations we was using D3, I think, which is a JavaScript framework, so you can actually turn that data into a graph. And for me, it's actually saying that although we have these data sets and they're really important, we need to be trying to graph them, map them, give them to people, even if it's a piece of artwork like that was discussed this morning, and saying, we've got this, this is what we think it means, and please come and help us and use it with us. And I think it's, to begin with, it's about actually saying we've got it, because a lot of people just don't know that it's there. And then it's trying to give people tools, and then obviously there's lots of stuff in schools at the moment about teaching children to code. So I feel intrinsically with those sort of skills that people will have, that they'll be much better equipped to deal with data in the future. So, yeah.
So, question from here. I have two questions. First, how do you fund yourself? And second, how do you make institutions to open their data? What is the process? do you lobby there? Because here in Bulgaria, there's a lot of open data initiatives, but the government is just like, we're not doing this at all.
So funding-wise, I actually work for a commercial company. We just have a lot of ties with the cultural sector. So although, for example, the Southbank, there's an in-house team working on it, they bring us in as specialists on, for example, user experience. So all of the examples that I showed you in the middle, they were part of hack days and people have produced them for free, whereas my work, you're right, I do get commercially funded for it. When it comes to persuading people to open up their data sets, I think it's about showing them what value they can get back out of it. So it's using examples and actually saying, well, this is what these people have done. And look, because even though obviously I get funded by museums and cultural institutions, they don't have a lot of money. And by doing initiatives where they are actually collaborating with the community, they're getting a lot more value back out of the things that they're doing. So I think it's trying to make that use case for if you do this, then look at the sort of things you could get back in return. And you would never have been to produce that level of like brainstorming or you know actual work commercially would be completely prohibitive. But if you're doing it kind of as part of the community and trying to be involved, then I think you can show those sort of benefits to them. It's difficult, basically.
We have one more over here, in the back.
Hey.
Hey.
Just a quick question. I'm also a designer / an artist, and I was wondering if you have any tips, because I have driven into processing the programming language and D3.js, but I can't code that much, and I come up with some horrifying hacks, and then my developers want to kill me. And if you just have any tips how designers should work with software developers to create interactive stuff. Thank you.
I think it is about the relationships between the people. It really does come down to if you have a very open relationship between, well, I have this skill set and you have this skill set, and if we come together, we can produce something amazing. And I don't have the skills in this area, but you do. Please help me. And it's a very collaborative process. I think you can get a long way with that. But also, if I really want to do something, I'll do like a paper prototype, or I'll make like a JPEG click-through film and be like, look, see, it would, like, this is what I'm thinking. If I can't express it properly in words, which quite often I can't, I will draw it out and I'll storyboard it and say, well, this is what I'm thinking and this is why. So I think storyboarding and really like rough animations, however rough, really are like, do go a long way to expressing what you want from things.
Cool. Let's thank Hollie.